Hi everyone. The principle of diminishing marginal returns is an important topic, so I want to say a few more things about it. First, to make things a little bit simpler, we're going to talk about the marginal product of capital, which I'm going to abbreviate capital MPK. And diminishing marginal returns, if you think back to the last video, really says this if you want to go ahead and put it in words. Holding all else constant, increases in the capital stock lead to a decrease in the marginal product of capital. And if you think about the ditch digging example, that's exactly what was happening. Holding the number of workers, the technology, and all that stuff constant, as you added more and more shovels, the extra output you were getting from the additional shovel declined. Now, it's important to note that the marginal product of capital is still positive. It's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and getting closer and closer to zero without ever actually quite getting there. Okay, so the important thing is increases in the capital stock, holding all else constant, leads to a decrease in the marginal product of capital. That's the principle of diminishing marginal returns. Okay, one other thing I want to point out that I don't think was necessarily clear in the last video, that if you go ahead and you take a look at your aggregate production function, here you go, here's my capital labor ratio, and here is labor productivity on the vertical axis. Just go ahead and pick a point, and here's your capital labor ratio. And I'm not so much worried about labor productivity, so I'm not going to talk about that. And let's just say this is my capital labor ratio, and here's point, or actually call it this, A, and this is point A. Okay, now the slope at point A, and the slope is going to be the slope of the tangent line. Okay, the slope at point A is the marginal product of capital at point A. And I'm not going to prove that because we're not really using calculus in this course. But if I was using calculus, I could go ahead and prove it. So here I'll just go ahead and slope at point A equals the marginal product of capital, A. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and pick another one, another capital labor ratio, and call it capital labor ratio B. Okay? Well, if I go up, and here's point B, and let me draw the slope, let me draw the tangent line, and notice it has a slope. Well, the slope at point B is the marginal product of capital at point B. Okay. Now, what do you notice about these two slopes? Well, it should be pretty clear that, oops, let me erase this. It should be pretty clear that the slope at point A is greater than the slope at point B. Another way of saying that is the marginal product of capital at point A is greater than the marginal product of capital at point B. And that flows entirely from the principle of diminishing marginal returns. Because we've assumed everything else you can imagine that influences labor productivity is constant other than the capital labor ratio, that means you're on a single production function, meaning the production function is not shifting. Therefore, as you change the capital labor ratio, as the capital labor ratio increases, the principle of diminishing marginal returns says the marginal product of capital will fall. So whatever the marginal product of capital is at point A, it's going to be greater than what it is at point B. Therefore, another way to think about it is the principle of diminishing marginal returns says as your increased capital stock, or equivalently in this case the capital labor ratio, the marginal product of capital falls. So the marginal product of capital at point A should be larger than it is at point B. Alright, so I just wanted to clarify those few things, and the next video will discuss how to think about shifts in the production function.